Greetings, everybody. I'm Patty Seeger. I'm the Executive Director at End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin, which is the statewide advocacy organization supporting all of the domestic violence victims and programs in Wisconsin. It's really good to see you all here, such a great crowd and a lot of faces that I know. So this is wonderful. We're here today with the Governor and the Attorney General to sign some key bills that are designed to support victims and their families. And as always, we're extraordinarily grateful for the opportunity to be able to pass legislation that continues the work of supporting families and their children. I'd like to start out today by introducing Attorney General Brad Schimmel, but before I step aside, I want to say a few words. Attorney General Schimmel has been a great resource for us. He's very strong on victim rights and victim advocacy, so we're very pleased to work with him as the Attorney General. And I want to also say a few words about our governor. Last year, 2 years ago, we met with the governor's office and proposed what I thought was a transformative budget increase for domestic violence services in Wisconsin. We actually asked for $19 million, which we knew we wouldn't get. But we had done a lot of research and we understood that victims and children were not being properly served in Wisconsin because we simply did not have the resources to do so. In response to that meeting, the governor helped us out greatly by giving domestic abuse programs a 77% increase, a $5 million increase, which is indeed transformative. And I can't speak with enough gratitude for that, for the first time in many years, domestic violence programs are able to add staff and to address living wage issues for their employees. And some of them are able to provide health benefits that they haven't ever been able to provide to their employees. So this is really an important step, and I will be forever grateful to Governor Walker for doing so. With that, I'm going to introduce our Attorney General, Brad Schimmel. Thank you.
It's a very small podium. And I had to make myself a list because we've, in this session, it's been a great session. We've done quite a few really good things for victims' rights. And I wanted to make a list to make sure I remembered all of them. And back on March 24th, the governor signed amnesty from underage drinking tickets or consequences through someone's school if they report that they've been sexually abused or someone stays and helps their friend and they've been drinking. The last thing in the world they should worry about is getting in trouble for drinking when a sexual assault has happened. He signed some great legislation this morning to help our crime victim compensation program work better. The victim accompaniment bill, forever we've had a criminal defendant has the right to have an advocate with them, and we tell them about that. But prior to charging a defendant, we didn't do that for crime victims, and that's a fantastic move forward for our state, which has been a leader in victims' rights with our state constitutional amendment and our statutes that are very good. But this is a great improvement. So we've done a lot of great things already, and now this afternoon, assuming all goes well in the next few minutes, the governor's going to sign some more great legislation. And I want to talk most about the restitution bill. It does some really great things for victims. Crime victims come in all shapes and sizes. No two are alike. Some people can have something that we would instantly view as horrendously serious, and they can deal with it okay, and other ones, things that we might think wouldn't be such a big deal, and they really struggle with it because it's personal to everybody. But there's a couple things that they all have in common. One is they didn't want to be here. They didn't wish to become a crime. No one said this today, I think I'll become a crime victim. And another one is most of them who have had any kind of financial loss as a result of the crime committed against them, they share the same frustration trying to get their restitution. They time and time again, that's what they tell us. This bill will provide for several important things for them. One is, first off, it makes clear that in all areas, after a court convicts someone and orders fees and assessments and everything else, victims' restitution comes number one. And we've closed up a loophole relative to that. Second, forever it's been the case. If a victim's actually able to get a judgment and get a wage garnishment, they'd have to keep going back every 13 weeks to renew that wage garnishment. It was a foolish waste of time. Now, with this bill, victims can get their wage garnishment and keep collecting until their restitution is paid without having to go through all that rigmarole. And then it enables them to do what county government could do, to intercept someone's tax refund to get their fees paid for. Well, now victims will be able to use that process too, so that they can get made whole. And then protecting the confidentiality of victims of especially very invasive crimes, to enable them to have ways to have their identity harder to find. Not their identity, but where they are. It's so easy nowadays to find someone. It's so hard to hide. And there's many victims who have every reason to need to hide, to need to not be found. And we're going to help them through these bills. And being able to get a judge to order that their cell phone number be transferred over so they don't have to change everything, because the person they shared service with is now facing some kind of consequences for their actions. Notification about revocation of supervision. These things sound like such good common sense, and I see some legislators here today, Representative Taylor and Representative Brooks. Thank you so much for your work on this. I saw Representative Rodriguez. Who am I missing? Hopefully no one. But thank you so much for your work on these important bills, and thank you for being here to support them today. And then thank you, Governor, for your support for this important legislation. And this isn't the first time, as your introduction said, this isn't the first time you've taken big steps to help crime victims in Wisconsin get better justice. And I want to thank you for your commitment to that. And with that, the Governor.
Well, I want to say thanks as well. First off, to Brad Schimmel, our Attorney General, who's done a tremendous job. And obviously, you've had a career long before being the Attorney General as a prosecutor, and really trying to work not only in terms of enforcing the law, but I know your experience in Waukesha County, working on behalf of the victims of crime, and particularly trying to work with partners within the community. And you're doing that now again here and been a great champion. Appreciate that. We were just talking about a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a tour with Representative John Nygren, who has a very personal story about prescription drug abuse and heroin abuse, and Brad was a part of that as well, and appreciate your leadership. Patty, thank you for not only the kind words, but it's a great partnership. We appreciate working with you and all that you do to help lead this issue statewide, and really been a tremendous advocate, and it's easy to work with you, and we appreciate that. And Shannon, thank you for letting us be here at this site. As Patty mentioned, a few years ago, we plugged some money into the state's capital budget, not only because it's important here in Dane County, and hat tip to the county executive and the county board for the tremendous support that they provide here, as well as a lot of other supporters throughout the community. But for us, we saw it as not just Dane County. We saw when I toured the other site back when like a lot of other sites that serve individuals and families who are victims of domestic violence, for years so many sites were kind of hidden. And like this site here today, it's out in the open, it's much more inviting. I think it sends a message not only to victims, but to those in the community as a whole, how important this issue is. But we saw then, and we see very much now here, that you not only provide services to folks here in Dane County, but all throughout this region. It really is a regional draw and a resource. And so that's why we thought it was worthy of not just a local, but a statewide commitment. We're glad to see our tiny piece of that along the way. In a moment, I'm going to sign 4 pieces of legislation into law, and it's exciting not only because of these specific measures, but these are the sorts of things, and I appreciate the media being here, because a lot of times when you see things that Democrats and Republicans work together on, they don't get a lot of coverage. because the stories that are flashy are those where there's contrast and conflict. And oddly enough, I went back and looked, and about 97% of the bills I've signed since I've been governor had more than just Republican votes in the legislature. But you don't usually hear a lot about those. You hear about the 3 or 4% that don't. These are some of the bills that I think people, no matter whether you're on the far right or the far left or somewhere in between, you say this is what you want your government involved with. So I'm pleased to sign these into law, but also to thank the lawmakers who are here and those that you represent. We've had 4 we're going to sign now. We've done a series, as the Attorney General mentioned, in different parts. I was up at the Golden House up in Green Bay earlier. I was at the Women's Community in Wausau before that, as we've done other sites across the state, really to draw attention, particularly this week during National Victim Rights Week, to reinforce the rights of victims, but also their families, and to show support. And Brad mentioned a couple of the other bills that we've signed, we've been pleased to. But today, particularly, I want to mention, and I'll look at my cheater notes as well if I forget, but I'm going to go in order here. I'm going to sign first off, Representative Rodriguez and Senator Roth have a bill that really is about, it seems so simple, but it's so important. It's about cell phones. It's about saying if someone takes that leap of faith, which we know at sites like this is so tremendously important, when someone makes that decision to leave an abusive relationship, to leave an abusive household, that there's all sorts of challenges, but one you wouldn't think of, but that's really tremendously important, is oftentimes the cell phone that individual has might be under the name of the abuser. And so this legislation will allow cell phone providers to separate that out, to ensure that individual, and for that matter, any children that they have that are fleeing with them, are able to keep their cell phone with all their personal data on, with their address book, with all the other things that are just so vitally important to surviving these days, to keep access to that. And again, that had broad bipartisan support, so we appreciate that. Secondly, thinking about, mentioned Representative Brooks and Senator Taylor, looking at Senator, I got to make sure because I'm going to come to Representative Taylor in a moment, but Senator Taylor having legislation that deals with notification for revocations. Right now, a crime victim is notified of other things, such as if someone's up for parole or someone's going on from confinement to placement within the community, but they're not notified if someone is revoked of that status. And so this is about giving more peace of mind to victims and their families and support network as well. Again, broad-based both in the authors and in the support overall. Representative Hutton and Senator Olson have legislation that deals with a first straw, as the Attorney General talked about, saying that the court system and others say money that offenders make, particularly when they're incarcerated, is used to pay off all sorts of costs to the corrections department and to the criminal justice system. But this legislation will make it clear that victims get restitution first, they're the first straw, and that before anything else happens, that they get that whatever finances might be available from them. And then finally is one that's probably the grandest in terms of all the different co-sponsorships, because Representative Taylor, as well as Representative Clayfish, joined with the 2 Senate leaders, Senator Fitzgerald and Senator Schilling, to put forward legislation that deals with confidentiality of addresses, and in particular, working with the Department of Justice to make sure, again, when someone makes that move, one of the most threatening things after they get, in some cases, emergency shelter and then seek to reestablish their residency and, more importantly, their life, the last thing they want to do is keep looking over their shoulder and wondering if the person who brought on that abuse is somehow going to try and find them and threaten them and relive all of that. And so this allows people who've been in that situation, who've gone through the court process, to be able to get an address that then that information, be it from any number of entities, can be directed through the Department of Justice and sent to those individuals. It ties in well with something one of the bills in particular we signed earlier in Green Bay, which allows for the interstate agreements with 18 other states and 2 other jurisdictions that now say if someone gets a protective order in another state, such as a restraining order, that order not only counts in that state, but now with the law I just signed earlier today, that carries to Wisconsin and vice versa. Because we know the threat to individuals and families doesn't know any borders, It doesn't know economic borders, it doesn't know political borders, it doesn't know geographic borders. And so all these things are important to help protect victims overall, but particularly with this legislation, the victims of domestic violence, and all too sadly, unfortunately, also oftentimes child abuse, which often go hand in hand with domestic violence. These are all things that we're helping along the way. Most of all, though, we appreciate all the advocates who day in and day out. These are just tools. These are things the state can help out with, but it's really the good work of advocates here and across the state that are really doing the heavy lifting. And why we wanted to do that this week is to draw more attention to this issue and to know that the people in the community need to know that there are resources not only for people looking to flee, but resources for those who may be dealing with stress and other issues that lead them into situations of domestic violence and other victimization, and that we certainly hope and encourage people to get that help before they get to that point along the way. So with that, we're going to sign these in law, invite the lawmakers, Shannon, Patty, others to come on up and join us. Yeah, if you want, you can come on all the way, sure. Jesse, come on up. Although you're supportive of both sides. It's got, hey, thanks for testifying. Sure.
If we have a tug of war, I'm sure we're going to lose a little bit more people on the left side there.
You're bouncing on
The better side anyway.
A little more right over there.
You're bouncing on
Just think those Rodriguez, how many heads you could use.
Right, yes. Well, that's why I said, April, it gets a little bit easier in months like December, November, I got a lot of pens, right?